Right, hi everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to have a look at this search component. Search, which will allow us to filter a list of records. We will also have this order by field, which will allow us to sort the items in a list based on whichever field we decide to, as well as how many pages, so how many records per page we'd like to be displayed. Obviously, filtering is going to work the way as you would expect it. So for instance, if I start typing, you'll see that only records that match the string entered into the search fields are being displayed. We still can obviously order them accordingly. We can click this button here to clear the input, pagination at the bottom with the buttons and a select. You can go directly to the given page. So that's what we're going to be working on. Now, what we're going to be using, we're going to be using Laravel, and we're going to be using Vue.js as well as Vuex for the state management. And to start with, what we need to do is to clone the repository for this particular course, and you'll find it at github.com/ssd-tutorials/Laravel-vue-vuex-search-pagination. My recommendation would be to fork it to your own account and then clone it. I'm going to clone it directly from this account. So if I just go to the terminal, in the directory that I want to install it, so git clone, and there we go. Okay, now if I navigate to this directory, so it's cd laravel vue vuex search pagination. If I check all the files, there we go. The first thing I want to do is to copy .env.example into the .env file. So copy env example to env. Now I'm going to install Composer dependencies, so Composer install. And while we're waiting, I'm going to open this project in my IDE. Let's just go to open and code search pagination. Okay, so here's the project. You can see our README file has a piece of code that we're going to use later on within the test. Rather than typing all this by hand, we can just copy and paste it later on. Okay, so let's just go back. Our dependencies have been installed. So now let's generate the key, PHP artisan key generate. Okay, so now the key should be generated under the app key within the .env file. The next thing we're going to do is to install npm dependencies. So npm install, excuse me. And when this is installing, I'm going to show you actually what we have within the package.json. So we're going to be using Axios for the Ajax calls. We're going to be using Lodash, just a single method, the bounce, so that we don't make calls to the server with every stroke on the keyboard. We're going to be debouncing this, the request. Then we have Sass, because within the resources we have Sass file, and we are using Tailwind CSS. And you will see when you open this file that it's just importing Tailwind components, base components, and utilities. We also need the Vue template compiler, as well as Vuex for the store. We are also using PostCSS, and I've already set it up. If you open webpack.mix, you'll see that we are importing Laravel mix here. We then have Tailwind, and we add this full human post CSS -purge CSS to remove any styles that after the file's been compiled, any styles that are not being used within the project, they're going to be removed, obviously making the CSS file much smaller. And yeah, everything else, we're going to be compiling app.js and app.css to the public directory under the assets, and for JavaScript files, they will be under the JS directory, for CSS under CSS. So that's all this. Let's have a look at how this installation is going. It's still going, so we can close this for now. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is we are going to create the first test. We haven't got anything under the featured, so let's open. Actually, let's have a look at this. Maybe, yeah, that's all completed. So now what we need to do, because if we try and preview it in a browser, you'll see now what will happen is this is Laravel Vue search pagination, but not the completed one. I want the one that I've just installed. And you see, obviously, it tells us the mix manifest does not exist because we need to recompile the files first. So npm run, and I'm going to run def because we only need it locally, the copy for the local development. So while this is compiling all the assets, it's gonna take a short while, I suppose. So if we go back to the editor, what I'm going to do is actually not the editor, sorry, that's compiled anyway. That's fine. If we preview it in the browser now, you'll see we have a default template, and this template is being fetched from, if we open root, web, the current root, just a /, so just the domain /, points to product controller, index methods, and its name is product. So if we go to app, HTTP controllers, you'll see we have product controller and we have our index method, which returns the view under the product index. So views are under resources, views, and then we have products, and we have index. We are extending up, which is the file right one directory up. You can see just a basic template here. Again, we're using obviously Tailwind CSS. If you're not familiar, obviously visit tailwindcss.com, I believe it is, tailwindcss.com, yes, and you can click on get started and obviously see how it all works, or just use your own styling, obviously. So there we go. So I've split it into the sections. We have the search form, which we are going to be converting, then we have the results section, and lastly we have the pagination. All of these sections will be extracted into the components later on. I'm pretty sure we're not going to be able to finish this whole thing today because there's quite a bit of work. So we will probably split it into 2 or maybe even 3 sections. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how much we can do today, and then we decide whether it's going to be another or 2 extra sessions. Okay, so the first thing, obviously, is you can see the template is just a static. It's got all the elements, but obviously it doesn't do anything. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to provide the functionality on the server so we can send the request, fetch the records, and so on. And then possibly in the following session, we will have a look at Vue and the VueJs to obviously fetch those records using JavaScript. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is to create a new test. We're going to start with the test. So let's go back to the terminal, and we're gonna start with the test. PHP artisan, PHP artisan make test, and it's going to be fetch product test. If we go back to our editor, you can see that out under the tests feature directory, we have now this file generated. We can remove what's in it. We're going to use refresh database. So let's keep this import. So here, use refresh database, and we are going to override the setup. So override, and I'm going to use a setup method. First, we're going to call the parent setup method, and then what I'm going to do, let's add dog blocks as well quickly. And returns void. What we are going to do next is create the config file, and this config file will be called, it's going to be a PHP file called, we're going to call it system. There we go. And here what I'm going to do is, let me just quickly have a look at my notes. Within the system, we're going to have 2 entries. We're going to return the array, and this array will have 2 entries. As I said, it's going to be per page, the default array representing the number of records that we want to allow per page, and we're going to have 10, then we're going to have 20, say 30 and 50. and we're going to have default per page will be 10. So that's our config file. So now, because we have it specified in a config, we can obviously overwrite it for the test. And to do this, we are going to use config helper, config, and we're going to go within the array system, full stop per page, and we are going to say that we will have 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to duplicate this line. Then we're going to have default per page will be 1. So rather than generating 10 records, for instance, or 20, 30 records to be able to paginate, we only gonna have to generate, say, 3 or 4 to make sure that we obviously will be able to test the pagination functionality of it. Okay, so the first test. Will check. Well, it will check for the errors when we are making the request without passing any parameters, because we're going to be passing the parameters through the query string. However, if we just go back to our original form, you will see that if I say type ET here and it shows us some records, and it's 7 records filtered. You see we don't have any query string in the URL. And if I go to the edit page, now I didn't provide any implementation for edit page. This is just a blank blade file. You can see we don't pass any query parameters either. If we go back, however, the selection, the result filtered by whatever we've selected or typed in remains on the page. So we don't have to use query string, because what we are doing, we are using sessionStorage. As you can see, we have product search here with all these keywords for search input, for per page. We have which page we're on and order by. All this is going to be stored within a sessionStorage. Okay, so let's go back, and what we are going to start with is the first method will say validation fails with empty request. We will always expect the request to have these parameters that we've just seen. So we're gonna start with the response equals this get JSON, and we're gonna go for the root. And this root will be called product fetch. We obviously don't have this root yet, so obviously when we will test, we will run this test first time, we're gonna get errors, we know it already. Okay, so then we're gonna go for response, assert status. Status we're expecting to be unprocessable entity, which is 422. So I'm going to use a response class, which extends Symfony response, and they've got all those constants here representing different status codes. So we can use it like that rather than just typing it in. It's a little bit more understandable this way. We have HTTP unprocessable entity. Okay, and then we have response assert exact JSON, and the JSON we are expecting is going to be in the form of the array. First of all, we're going to have errors, because that's how Laravel returns the errors. And then we're going to have a message which will say the given data was invalid, with a full stop at the end. Okay, so for the errors, what I'm going to expect to receive will be the search field. And what error are we expecting to see? And they need to be in the array. So I'm going to use this language helper, 2 underscores, and we're gonna use a validation file. And where this is coming from, let me just show you straight away. If you go to resources, you have language, you have EN, or whichever language you're gonna be working with, and then we are going for the validation. So validation file, and I just split the screen here, and the entry for present, because search, it doesn't have to have anything, but it needs to be present in the query string that we're going to be sending. So present. And now if we search here for present, you'll see that we have this placeholder for the attribute. So what we want to do is pass the array as a second argument to this helper, which will say an attribute, replace it, we don't need the colon here in this array, replace it with the search So what is this is going to say? It's going to say the search field must be present. That's how it's going to work. Basically, it's going to replace this keyword, but it's going to find that we're using this colon at the beginning and then replace it with whatever we're passing for the value for this index. Okay, so that's for the search. Now, next one, and I'm just going to close it because the other ones will follow the same structure. I'm just going to duplicate this line. After the search, we are going to have order underscore by, and it's going to be validation required because this field will be required, and the attribute will be order space by, because how this helper works is that it actually will split any underscores and replace them with a space. So order by attribute. Then we're gonna have per page underscore page also required, and this one will be per space page. And lastly, we are going to have a page on which we are currently viewing, and that's going to be just page. So I'll replace the attribute with the keyword page. Okay, if we run this test now, if I just open terminal, so PHP unit, we obviously get the error. And the first error says we don't have root product fetch. So let's just go back to the editor. Open our roots file. I'm just going to close all this for now. Roots, web, and the first thing we want to do is I'm just going to duplicate this previous line. We're going to have product /fetch, and it's going to point to the fetch method on the product controller, and the name for this root will be product fetch. Name is what we then are using with the root helper to direct our query to the given endpoint. Okay, so our test is still going to fail, but we should see a different error now. So now we are seeing it expects status code 422, so on processable entity, but we are receiving 500, and this is 500 because if we open our product controller, you will see that we don't have this fetch method. So let's quickly create it, public function fetch, fetch, and we will return JSON response. It's going to be new JSON response. JSON response, and a dot block fetch records. And now what I'm going to do is just quickly go through my settings here in PHP Storm PHP, and that's going to be in the languages and the parser on 7.4 with the 7.4 interpreter. And now all those highlights should be gone. Good. Okay, so we have a fetch method. Let's run the test again. What do we get now? Now rather than 500, we are receiving 200, and we are expecting 422. Okay, so how are we going to tackle this? We need some sort of validation, and to create the validation, I don't like the helper, those helper methods within the being called from within the controller method. I always use requests. So what I'm going to create here, if I just quickly have a look at my files, we are going to create the fetch request file. So PHP artisan make, and it's going to be request, and let's put it under its own namespace. So it's going to be within the product directory. So product /fetch request. Okay, now we can import it. Let's just have a look at where this file is now residing. If we open requests under the app HTTP product, and we have our fetch request here. So I'm going to import it, inject it to this method. So now this provides a layer of validation for us. If I try and run the test now, you'll see that we are PHP unit getting different error, which is 403, and this is because of the authorization. All requests by default come with this authorize method, which returns false, but we don't need any authorization for this particular case, so we're just going to remove this method. If I run the test again, we will again get 200 because we don't have any validation yet. So let's just split the screen so I can refer to the fields that we are after. I'm going to close the file browser on the left, and this one returns array. So returning, we're gonna need search, which will need to be present, And what else validation? What other validation do we have here? One sec. Okay. So we have search, and yeah, that's all that it needs to have. It's just present. Okay, so search, then we're going to have, let's go for per page first, because order by we're gonna split into two different properties. So per page will be required, and it needs to be within the allowed collection. So if we open our config.system.php file, you remember we have this per page, we only will allow these values. If different values being provided, then that should invalidate the request. So what I'm going to use is the rule class, and rule has this in method, which takes an array of records that we want to allow. And what we're going to do now is simply use the config helper and point to the file that contains the record, the rules, sorry, the records that we want to allow. So in our case, it's going to be system file and the entry per page. Let's just copy it because I have a tendency of misspelling things. So, okay, so that's going to be our per page. The next thing is going to be page. So which page we are currently on. We can close this one. And page will be required as well. And it needs to be an integer, because it will represent the number, the page number. Then we're going to have our order by field, which will be required as well. And it will also needs to be a string. The way we are going to form the order by is going to be, and let me just quickly open the resources views, our index.php and blade.php. You'll see that if we scroll down order by, the value will be the field name, colon, and which order do we want to sort it by. So name in the ascending order, name in the descending order, price ascending and price descending for the products. So it needs to be a string, and it is a required field. Now, what we're going to do next is we are going to add two fields, which we won't be sending with this request, but they will represent the order by values. We will split this order by, whatever we're going to receive with this request as order by, into two separate fields. It's going to be order field and order direction. And I'm going to close this file, close everything on the left. So if we type order field, which will be rule again, and we're going to look for in, and now I'm going to delegate it to the methods. Let me just quickly order by field. In this case, actually, what we're going to have is going to be, I'm going to start this way because later on we're going to refactor this whole exercise to have a trait which we can reuse with different models. So for instance, if you have, say, pages, articles, you will still be able to use the same structure. Rather than duplicating the code, you'll just have a trait. But for the time being, let's just put it all statically here. Okay, so order field, we will only allow name and price because these are the only fields that we have for the product. And then we're going to have order direction, which allows only, again, rule in, allows only ascending A as C and descending DE as C. Only these values are allowed. Now, one thing, how do you obtain these fields? If they're not going to be sent with the request, how do we actually validate them if we know for sure they are not being sent from the client? Well, to do this, we are going to make use of the method which is available to us. If we just go to form request, and I'm just going to look for it, it's called prepare for validation. And you can see this method is empty at the moment, but before we validate before the validate resolved method is being called, this method is being called first. So what we can do here is we can work with what's been sent, set certain properties, certain offsets on the request, and then validate them through the use of these rules method. So I'm going to just go back and copy this entire method together with the doc blocks and close these files. So we're going to, before we validate, we want to prepare this file, and it's going to return void. So the first thing I'm going to do is do this order by, and as you can see, my ID is highlighting this, but these are the fields that we're actually going to receive with this request. So what I'm going to do is create the doc blocks here and say property, string, or null search. Then we're going to have property, it's going to be per page integer per page. Then we're going to have a property integer page. Then we're going to have string order by, so property string order by. We're going to have property string order field, and we're going to have property string also order direction. So I'll just copy this. Order direction. Okay, so now you can see it's not highlighting it anymore. So order by will be this. Do we have order by? If we do, return it. Otherwise, 2 question marks. What we're going to do is this order by field. We are going to have default order by field. By default, we are going to use name, and we're going to concatenate it with this colon, and we're going to concatenate it with, actually we don't have to concatenate it here, we can do it within a string ascending. So this is going to be a default value. If we don't have order by, make sure that order by is represented by ascending name and the ascending order. Then what we are going to do is destruct the array, this order by. So we're going to use order, and then we're going to have direction equals, and we are exploding using the colon this order by. So now our order is going to be whatever is before the colon, and the direction will be represented by whatever is after it. So now we're going to do this offset set, because we want to set the offset on this request. So we have actually the field called order field. So we're going to set order field, and we're going to use this order value. And then I'm going to duplicate this. We're going to set order direction using the direction. So now these fields are available on this request, and when we're going to do the validation, they will be available from within these rules array. Okay, so the next thing is going to be per page. So this per page equals, and we're going to go for integer. We want this to be an integer, and within the brackets, this per page. If it is, return it. Otherwise, use the one from the config. So config, and we're gonna go for system default per page. If it's not present, then make sure that it's taking the default value. And then for the page, so this page equals, and again we want to typecast it to integer. We're gonna go for this page. If it is, return it. Otherwise, it's going to be the first page. So number 1. Okay, let's run the test. We see what's gonna happen. So now PHP unit, and there we go. We have the validation, obviously causing all those issues and obviously making our test pass, because we were expecting the validation to fail, and it does return these messages apparently. So our first test is now completed. Let's now go to the second one. And the second one, we are going to test for the correct values. So public, test, we're gonna go for validation fails with invalid values. Okie dokie. Let's just quickly have a look at that. So with the incorrect values. So we're going to go for the response again. I'm going to copy this first line. And I'm going to pass an array of attributes, the parameters for the query string, comma after the path, the name of the root and the array. And we're going to go for search, and search will be just an empty for now. Empty string, then per page will be 4 I'll set, which is obviously invalid because 4 isn't being listed here, so that should invalidate the request. Then we're going to go page. We are going to send a string, a letter A. Again, we know that page needs to be an integer, so that's going to invalidate as well. And then order by, we're going to go for invalid sort. Excuse me. We only expect name and price before. Invalid obviously is already invalid. And after that, it should only be ascending or descending, and we are sending sorts. Obviously, this is definitely invalid entry. Okay, so I'm going to start with all this. Let's just copy all that. Now, what we're going to change here is for the validation, we won't get anything for the search because we can send an empty string as long as the index is present. Order by, it's going to be not required because we're sending something. Order by is going to be in. We're using this in method, so it will return in message. And then let me just have a look at this in order by field. Actually, order by isn't going to be here. It's going to be order field and order direction, because order by will be satisfied with this string because it is required, so we have a value and it does have a string. The order field and direction, however, is not going to work. So we're going to receive order field, and it's going to be in, and that's order field. And then we're going to have order direction, and I'm just going to duplicate this. Also in rule fails, so order direction. And then we have per page. Per page is also in because it's not within the system defined the configuration that we've declared in our config here. We are sending 4, which is not present within this collection here. And then we have page, which is going to fail for the integer because we are sending the string and validation requires the integer. So let's run this test. Well, we're going to run both of the tests at the same time. And there we go. Both of them are passing, so that validation is definitely working. Okay, so the next thing, let's just have a look at how we're getting on. The next thing is going to be checking that we actually retain the correct results, the correct records, the filter, the default filter without actually overwriting any default parameters. So test, and we're gonna say, if we just scroll up a little bit, returns underscore records with default filter. And we're going to start with creating some products. So products, and we don't have a model yet. We create in just a moment. We're going to also have a factory for it. So factory, and it's going to be product class. And we're going to create, say, 15 records, create methods, and then we want to make sure that they are sorted by name. So sort by name, because that's the default order by parameter. So order by name in the ascending order. Now we don't have this product, so rather than running tests and seeing that it's failing because of that, let's just quickly create this model. So PHP artisan make model, and let's do product, and we also want the migration for it. So migration, there we go. So both of these should now be a few seconds. Yeah, there we go. That should all be available. So we have product, and our product model will, if we just open actually the database migration as well. So the migration, we're going to only use a name and price, I think we've been using. Yeah. Okay, so for the fields, we're going to have big integer. For the ID, we're going to have created at and updated at timestamps, but we also have table, string, and it's going to be name of the product, table, and it's going to be float, column with the price, and it's going to, by default, it's going to be 0. Obviously, in the real project, you would have more fields for the product. For this particular exercise, that's all we need, name and price. So under the product, what we're going to have is, I want to make sure that I can must assign, let me just check these guards attributes, fillable. So that's the first thing I want to do, is go back here, paste it, fillable, and I want to be able to must assign name and price. This will allow us to use create, update, and update methods by just using array and associative array by specifying fields and the values for them. And then the other thing I want to do is to make sure that our price is casted to a float. So if we just go back here, has attribute, and we have cast property. And what I want to do is say price field, make sure that it is converted, typecasted to float. And that's all that we need inside of our product model. Now we can import this class right here at the top. Let's just rearrange this slightly. Okay, so we have our product. Now we obviously don't have this factory yet, so let's quickly create this factory as well. PHP artisan make factory, and it's going to be called product factory. For those who are unfamiliar with factories, factories allow us to generate some dummy records basically on the go. Whatever, how many you want. You can see we are using this factory helper here. We pass what model we want to use, and then how many records we want to create. Let's open our database, and we have factories, product factory, product factory, there we go. And let's replace this model with product. Let's import this class, remove this one. And we're going to use name. For name, use the faker. We want, actually, if I do this, let's just do UC first to make sure that the first letter of these words, because it's going to be more than one, is a capital. So we're going to use faker. You make sure that it's a unique name, and we're going to go for words methods. We want 3 words and true to make sure that it's returned as a string, not an array. Excuse me. And then we're going to have a price. And for the price, what I'm going to do is just use faker. Again, we can use unique. And let's use random float. And we're going to say, well, number of maximal decimals is going to be 2 from 0 to 100. Pounds, dollars, or whatever currency you're going to be using. Okay, so our factory is now in existence, so that will work. The next thing we need to do is to make the call to the server. So I'm going to use this response from before, paste it, and this time I'm going to say search. By default, per page is 10. We know, per page default one is 1. Default one for this particular exercise while we're testing is 1. We're going to be on the first page by default, and by default we'll also have order by set as name as sending. These are the defaults for the request. So then what I'm going to do is do records equals, and we're going to use products. We want to skip 0 records, so we're starting right at the beginning of what the products are now representing. Remember, once we've created these records, they are all sorted by name in the ascending order. So from the first record, we take just one record, and then we're going to map it function, which with each iteration we're going to receive product, instance of the product. And then we want to just pull values. We don't want any IDs preceding them, and we want them to array. So we want to have an array rather than collection here. So we are going to return, and it's going to be name. Oops, sorry, wrong, not like this. It's going to be array merge, and we are going to use product, and we want to only get the fields name, ID, and price. I'm going to put it like this. So that's the first array, and we are merging it with edit URL, which will point us to root product edit, and we take product ID as a parameter there. We don't have this root yet, we'll create in just a moment. And if I duplicate this one, we also have a destroy URL, which will allow us to remove the record. Destroy URL, and that's going to be destroy. Now, one thing I can obviously see straight away is that our ID is highlighting this ID here. So what I'm going to do is go to product and our doc blocks as well. We're going to have a property integer ID. We're going to have property string name. We're going to have property float, which is the price. We're going to have a property which will represent the carbon instance created at, and then we're going to have updated at as well. These are the timestamps from the migration, may you remember, and now obviously this highlight is gone. So that's our records. That's what we are expecting to receive. So let's now do the assertions. So we go for the response first of all, assert status, and we are expecting OK. So 200 response HTTP OK, and then we're gonna go for response assert exact JSON will be represented by the array. And what I want to receive from this array, first of all, is what we've sent. So all of this. So what I'm going to go for, and maybe we can just copy all that. However, when we are going to receive it with the response, this empty string, I'm just going to convert it to null. And then we're going to have, for the order by, we're going to have name ascending. For the per page, it's going to be 1, because that's what we sent. Page is going to be 1. And after all this, we're going to have our record set. And our record set will have some values that we want, that will represent the status of our the collection that we receive. So for instance, how many records there are. So total index will be 15 records, because we've created 15 records. We didn't specify any particular filter, so it's going to return all of them. Then we are going to have previous page, which will be set to null because we are on the first page. So previous page will be null. We will have a next page because we are on the first page, and there are a total 15 records, and we only have one per page. So that's the next page is just going to be 2. Then we are going to have last page, which will be 15th page. And then we want our records. So records will be this records array. So that's our expectation. Now, if I run this test, sorry, wrong, not the factory PHP unit. There we go. We'll see the first error we're getting is this product edit is not defined, the root. So let's just quickly go to our roots and let's create that one. So this one is going to be product. Then we're going to have product ID, which we are passing as the second argument to the root. As you may remember, if I just go back, we have a name of the root, and then we pass in the ID of the product we want to refer to. And to the endpoint, let's just add edit. It's going to be get. All of them, they will be get. So the method will be edit, and the name is going to be product edit. And let's duplicate this one, and this one is going to be destroy, and the method is going to be destroy, and the name of the root was going to be destroy as well. Okay, so that's all good. I think we have all our roots defined now. Now, one thing, if we want to resolve this product ID into the model, the instance of the model, then what we can do is go to our providers, root service providers, and what we're going to do here, just 1 second, let me just have a look at my notes I've prepared earlier. Root service provider, and there we go. So the first thing we're going to do is we run from within the boot method, we run the parent boot, then we're going to go for root facade, and we're going to use patterns, and we'll make sure that product ID is of the integer type. So within the array 0-9 and a plus after that. And the root, just to make sure that you are importing the correct class, is going to be this illuminate support facades root. That's the one we need. And then we are going to bind the model of the product. So root model product ID. When you see product ID in the URL in the root, make sure that you resolve it to the product model instance. So class. There we go. This where it's not mode, it's model. Okay, and we can close this service provider. So this is also done. Let's just create these methods for edit and destroy. So public function edit, and as I said, we're not going to be providing any implementation, but we're going to have an instance of the product injected to this method, and that will return view get edit form return view. We're going to have a product directory product edit, and we're going to pass with product. Let's just create it quickly. As I said, we're not going to be providing implementation for this at all, but let's just have it here. So edit blade edit, and here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy some code. You will have these files available later on, so you can copy as well and paste and obviously compare against your own code. So just the product name we're going to display within the heading, and that's that. So that's the edit, and then we have destroy method. So public function destroy, and this one will also receive the instance of the product, and it will return a redirect response. Remove records, and again, redirect response is going to be illuminate HTTP redirect response. If you want to import it, if you have to do it manually, then that's the class you need. Okay, so here what I'm going to do is just quickly product delete and return new redirect response, and we're going to redirect the user back to the products landing page. So product root. Let's just add this exception throws tag, and that's everything for both of these methods. So our fetch, if we just go back here, let's just run the test again. So now it tells us that obviously we're not receiving what we are expecting. So we're expecting this, and we are only receiving an empty array. Okay, so this is where we're going to start working actually on the implementation of the search itself. So if we just go back. So from within the fetch, first of all, fetch request. First of all, I'm going to provide the method called response, because here, as far as controller goes, all we want to do is do request and return the response. So let's provide the implementation of this response method on this fetch request. So the response public function response, and it will return the array get response. And from here, well, let's start with return array. Obviously, if we run test now, we still receive exactly the same thing as we did before, so nothing breaks any feather. We're still in the same situation, but now, rather than just returning an empty JSON response, which will return empty array, now we're actually returning what's within this response method. So what I'm going to do, and bear me just a second. Yeah, we're going to do this later on. So what we're going to start with, go back. What I want to do is to create, first of all, obtain the request data. So request data is going to give me an instance of the object that contains all of the fields from the request. But because I want this to be later on used with many other modules, not just with this one, I want to make sure that everything is organized within the classes and that sort of thing. So rather than returning just an array of properties, we are going to work with the objects. So first of all, I need to create the class. Well, let's create the namespace first. Let's just close all these things on the left-hand side. And let's create a new namespace under the app called search. And under this search, we are going to create the file called request data. And it's going to be under the name, so I'm just going to add this namespace manually here. So namespace is going to be up search. Request data. Okay, so this one will implement arrayable contract, which means we need to have a method called toArray, which will just return array. And this one will we'll deal with this in just a moment. Let's first create a constructor. And now this constructor will take an instance of the payload. So to create the payload, what I'm going to do under the search is create a new directory called payloads. And within this payloads directory, I'm going to create a class called payload. And I don't know why PHP Storm doesn't actually automatically add namespaces. So let's just quickly do that. Up and it's search payloads. Okay, and my payload class will represent an abstract class because it's going to be used by specific payloads for the given module, or just a global one which we're going to have for this particular exercise, because most of the search forms that we're going to be dealing with will just have a search or the buy and pair page. So this will be the most standard one, therefore it's going to be like a global one. But sometimes you may want to have more fields. For instance, even with these products, we could have search for the name and then have a price range, for instance, fields as well to specify what price between what from and to price we'd like to use. But with this particular case, obviously we're only going to use the global one. Let's just have a look at the class again. So we're going to use implement, and it's going to also implement arrayable. And this class will only have an abstract class definition. So abstract public function has filter. And here this method will return Boolean. So whichever class will extend this abstract payload class will have to have an implementation of this method. Okay, so we are going to say determine if payload has query filter. Okay, and we can close this class for now. So now from within the constructor for this request data, the first argument for this constructor will be payload, and we're going to represent it by search. Then we're going to have integer per page, integer for the current page, and lastly string order by. And I need all of these properties initialized, so let's do them all. There we go. Let's just rearrange them slightly like this, and they will all be, rather than private, we're gonna make them public so we can use them later on outside of this class. And to array, what we're going to do is simply return array merge, and then we're going to use per page as this per page property. Then we're going to have page as this page property. Order by will be this order by. Excuse me. And then lastly, we are going to merge it with this search. This class we know will have two array methods because this payload implements arrayable. So whichever class extends it will have to have two array plus this has filter contractual requirement. So we are going to merge these indexes with whatever we have for the search for the given payload implementation. Okay, so that's our request data class. We can now close it, and going back to our request, we're going to create this method called request data. So public function request data, which will return the instance of request data, which we've just created. Get request data. Some of these things will make sense, a little bit more sense in just a moment, once we obviously get to the point where I can explain it. So we are going to return a new request data, and this request data, as you may remember, takes, first of all, it takes the payload, and now we need to decide what payload we're going to have. So under the payloads directory, we're going to create one that uses just a search, and obviously all those other well, this payload will only use a search because obviously the if we just go back, the order bar, pay page, and the current page is going to be sent in to this request data separately. So for the payload, what I'm going to create is going to be a class under the payloads called search only payload, and that class will extend payload. So straight away, let's just add those method stubs. And here what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to add this to array. I'm going to put here at the bottom, and it's going to return the array. I'm going to start with the constructor, which will take the string, which is the search keyword. By default, we set it to null. Update dot blocks, and let's initialize property. So we have search equals search, and now has filter. We'll check first of all return, and we're going to make sure that it's a boolean. So we force a boolean on it. We're going to go for this search. So if it's null, obviously that's going to return false. If there is anything associated with this search property, any value, then obviously that's going to return true for has filter. And now to array, what we need to do is just return search this search, and that's our implementation of search only payload. So going back to our fetch request, the first thing we're going to have is the payload. So new search only payload, and we pass this search. And if it's empty, then just null. The next thing we're going to pass through is this per page. Then we're going to have this page, and lastly this order by. So that's our request data. So we have this request data object. We have all those properties passed through. So our payload, which represents this search only payload with only one key, which is this search. When we are then merging this array, obviously, so we're going to obtain per page, purge, order by, and from this search only payload, we're going to just have search with whatever we've associated with this property from within the request, obviously. Okay, so the next thing, let me just quickly have a look. Request methods. So now product search we're going to create, and the product search is going to be under the queries. So under the search, we are going to create a new directory called queries. And here what I'm going to do is create the new class called search. We're going to start with this one. And again, namespace up search queries. And search class, there's quite a bit of codes that we need to put in. So we're going to start with, because it's going to be abstract as well class, it's going to be extended by specific implementations. We're going to start with constructor. And a constructor will take our request data. We're going to call it either request data or params. We're going to call it. And then order by class instance. Order. Let's just keep it as order. Now we don't have this order by either. So let's just quickly create this class here under the search, directly under the search. So order by. And let's leave it like this for now. We'll deal with this a little bit later on. And let's set these properties, doc blocks and initialize properties, params and order by. And we want them to be protected because we want the classes that extend this search class to have access to them. And let's move this order here as well. Okay. So now the first thing we want to do is, what am I going to do first? Let's create a few methods here. Params to array, record set to array. Okay. So we're going to start with the method called response. So public function response, which returns array merge. It's going to return the array. First of all, we're going to get params to array, so everything that we received with the request, and then we're going to connect it with record set, and this record set will be fetched from within this record set method, and we want this to be converted to array as well, so to array. Now it's going to be array get response. We don't have this record set method yet, so let's just quickly create it. So public function record set, and we are going to we are going to return another instance of a class, which is going to be called record set. Let's create this class straight away under the search. And this one, this record set, will also implement arrayable. Because it implements arrayable, it needs to return the array. And for the time being, that's all I'm going to return, just an empty array, just so we have the stub implementation of it. So record set, there we go. So that returns it. So this now is all good. We are within the search class. So our record set, it's going to be, first of all, we're going to start with the query. So query equals this query, then order by, and we go for order, and we're going to have a field on this order class, and then we're going to have order this order, and it's going to have direction property. Okay, so first of all, we need the query method, and the query method will come from the actual implementation. So let's create abstract protected function query, which will return the eloquent builder instance. Get SQL query, and then this order class. So if we order by, we've created just an empty class. Let's just quickly have a look at this. This one is going to be very simple, just a controller and properties. Constructor will take string field and string direction. Let's just quickly update it and initialize fields, and they will be public. That's all we need. So we have them available now. The next thing will be, we're going to count the number of records. So from within the record set, we go for total equals query. We're going to go for count, and we're just going to go for ID of the records. Then we're going to go for last page equals this last page method, and we pass total as an argument. Let's create this last page method straight away. So it's going to be protected function in case any of the subclasses will need access to it. It takes the integer total, and it will return the integer representing the last page in a collection. So get last page. Here, what I'm going to do is return, and we use sale function. Sale function will basically round the number up. So if we have say 5 records, and we want 2 per page, that's going to make sure that we get 3 out of it, because obviously 5 divided by 2, and so on. Okay, sale, so we're gonna go for total, dividing this by this params, and we're gonna go for per page. So we know how many records in total we have, because the query, we executed count on it, so we know how many total records, and then we divide it by the per page sent through with the request. So that's going to return the value. If it doesn't, then we just want to return first. So that's our last page. Now if we go back a little bit, so we have last page, then we're going to go for return new record set, and record set will take a few arguments as well. If I just open that one. Okay, so if we go to our record set, and let's create a constructor for it. Constructor takes a collection of records. Then we are going to have integer total records. Then we are going to have integer last page. Then we are going to have integer previous page. By default, we'll set it to null. And then integer next page is going to be null by default as well. Okay, so now let's just add dog blocks, and let's initialize properties, all of them. And we want them to be public as well. So private change to public. And we also need this to array. So this to array will have total. It's going to be this total. Then we're going to have pref page, this pref page. Then we're gonna have next underscore page, which is this next page. Then we're gonna have last page, this last page, and lastly we're going to have records, which will be this records, collection of those records that we pass through as a first argument. Okay, so that's our record set constructor. We can now close it. So record set, we are going to pass all those arguments. So first of all, we need the record. So this records, and we don't have this method yet. We're going to pass query to it. Then we're going to have total number of records, last page. Then we're going to have this previous page method, which we don't have at the moment either. Prev page. Then we're going to have this next page, again method, which we don't have yet. So let's start with this records. Records will come from the class implementing this one. So abstract again, protected function records, and this will return collection, but it will take a builder, eloquent builder. So builder eloquent, we're going to call it query. So docbox get records. Okay, and then we need the previous page. So after last page, we're gonna have, well, let's just go for, yeah, let's just do this way. Protected function, previous page, doesn't take any arguments. We're gonna go for return. This params, we take the page, the current page, and we check if it equals 1. If we're on the first page, then the previous page is null. We don't have a previous page. Otherwise, it's going to be this params page minus 1, and it returns integer. Get previous page. Then the next method was next page. Protected function next page. Again, this time we are going to actually take integer last page. Did we pass it through? No, we didn't pass it through, did we? Let me just check. Yeah, we need to pass it through the last page. And we're going to return integer. So next page, we are going to return this params current page is less than last page. Then we are going to return this params page plus 1. Otherwise, we return null. And actually here we need question mark because it might be null, it might be integer. Same for this one. And also let's add to the dog blocks that might return null as well. Okay, and it's going to be get next page. Okay, so request. We also, this is pretty much done here. We'll obviously have to work on this. If we go to the payloads, search only payload, you see we have, actually, sorry, wrong, not this one. We're going to create in a moment product search class, which will extend this one. We also need another method, which will take care of limiting the number of records, basically offset and how many we want to take. So I'm going to add it after this records method here. So protected function limit, it will take builder, which will represent query, and it will return void add limit query. So we're gonna take this query and we're gonna say take this params per page, so many records, and skip this params page minus 1, because page, when we're on the first page, then obviously
a array is indexed, starts index from 0, that's why we need to obviously make sure that if we ask not to skip anything, that needs to be 0. If we are skipping one set of records, then obviously that's going to be 1. And that's why we are actually deducting from the page pass through as an argument. With the request, sorry, we're deducting 1 to make sure that we've got the right number. Okay, and I'm going to actually wrap it within a set of brackets because we are going to then multiply this by this params per page. So that's going to give us the range of records that we are after. Okay, I think this class is now complete. Let me just double check everything is fine. Count ID, yes, that sounds so good. Record, so let's just add some doc blocks to this one as well, and we're gonna call it get record set. Okay, so let's recap. If we have a look at our test, I'm just going to split the screen here. So we're expecting to get search page, per page, or the buy and record set. So we're getting all those first ones from the to array on the params, and params obviously is this request data, which will return all of those to us. Then we have this record set index, which will return the record set here. We can see if we just look at this record set class in a moment, and then to array. So if we go record set to array, that's exactly what we're receiving: total, previous page, next page, last page, and record. So that's what we're going to get from it. Okay, so I think that class is completed. So we can now save and close it. Going back, where we fetch records, we have request data, response. Let me just have a look. Request data, request order. Okay, so going back to our fetch, we're going to create this new class called product search. So under the queries, I'm going to create a new class product search, specifically for this product search form. And this product search will extend search class. So let's just create those method stubs straight away. So we are required to provide the implementation of the query method as well as records. So for the query will start with just query equals product query, and then we're going to check if this params search has filter on our search only payload. We are checking if it's got the filter, if the value, if we have any value associated with the search input. So if it has filter, we're going to go for query where name is like, and then within a set of percentage symbols, this params search, and we get that search from within this class. But what I've just realized is that if we just go back to our payload, sorry, not the payload, search only payload, it's been set to private, it needs to be public, this property, so we can actually access it. So when name is like matches anything that the string, partially the string that we are passing through. And then we're just going to return it. So return query. So that's our query, which returns the query builder. And then to obtain the records, we are having the instance of the query builder. We're going to first start with this limit, and we pass our query there. And then we're going to return query to make sure that obviously we get the number of records, that the range of records that we are after. Then query, we get the records finally from a database, we map them function, and with each iteration we're going to have a product, and we're going to fetch just values. We don't need them with the IDs, and then return array merge. We're gonna go for product only, and we only want ID, name, and price. And we're going to merge it with those links. So edit URL will go to the root product edit, and we pass product ID as the argument, and then destroy URL root product destroy product ID. And that's our records. I think that should give us more or less what we're after. Let me just check if there's anything else. So if I now go back to the fetch request, we can now return instance of new product search. This one takes request data, so this request data, and it takes request order as well. Let's just quickly have a look at that one. For the request order, we're going to create the method with that name. So protected function request order, and it's going to return instance of the order by class. Request order by requests, let's just put it as a string order by. So here we're going to go return new order by, and we pass in this order field which we've generated earlier, then this order direction. So we can now pass as the second argument this order by, request order, and lastly we need to get the response from this object. That should be the response. Let me just check if we're missing anything else. Request data. I think we have everything here. Response. Okay, I think that for now that should be nearly there. So let's just run PHP unit, and we have all the tests passing. So our default controller now returns what we're after. If we don't pass anything to the filter, we just send the default selection, then we are going to receive the records we are after. So let's now quickly recap, because obviously there's been lots of coding. I was pretty much typing all the time. Let's just have a look at this again. So when we make a call for the fetch, first of all, we're going to go through this request file, and this request file specifies the rules, the validation rules. If they fail, obviously we get the response back that something wasn't quite right. But if it doesn't, before it actually validates anything, first of all, it's going to override the order by input by checking, is the order by available? If it is, use it. Otherwise, make sure that default one is name ascending, in the ascending order. We want to sort it. Then we are setting two new fields, order field and order direction, on this request, so they are available as input requests. Then per page, we make sure that if it exists, it's fine. We get it. Otherwise, we get the default one from a config file, and we make sure that it's of the integer type. The same goes for the page. If it's available, we use it. Otherwise, we are on the first page. Now for the response, which is being called from within the controller, we get the request and we call this response. Now, what happens with the response? We are returning the response from the product search, and product search is the class which is basically going to fetch the records and return them back to us. So first of all, we have this query method, which starts the query by using the model and calling the query method. Then if there is anything for the filter to filter records by name in this case, then get it and make sure that obviously we are only returning the records that match this given keyword, that partially, because we're using those 2 percentage symbols on both sides of this string. And then we return this query. Now what happens with this query within the search class, however, that query is being used. First of all, and we are adding the order by as well, based on this order by class that we passed through as an argument. Going back here, order by comes from this request order. We're passing order field and order direction, which we've generated earlier here by splitting the order by sent through with the request. So that class only has these fields. It sets them through the constructor and then we have access to them. That's all it does. So going back here for the record set, we run the query, then we attach this order by based on this order by class. And then first of all, we are counting how many records are matching this query. So we get the total. Then we get the last page. And last page, if we scroll down, is being calculated using sale function. We take the total divided by number of records per page. Otherwise, if it's not going to return anything, then we're gonna get 1 as the last page. So that's the last page. Then we have record set that we are returning. We're passing through records. And again, records we are implementing on the class that actually extends this search. So we get, first of all, we are attaching the limit. Going back to the search, we have this limit method here. We make sure that we only take so many records, how many per page we specified, and then from what records are we skipping. For instance, if it's 0 multiplied by number of per page, it's obviously going to give us 0. So from the first record in the table. Otherwise, if it's, let's say, we're on a second page, -1 is going to be 1 multiplied by number of records, say 10, that would give us 10. So from the 10th record and so on. So that's going to provide a limit query to our builder. And then we finally fetch all these records, calling this get method on the query. And then we are mapping them. We're going through each record and we're making sure that we return, for each record, we just return the array, which will consist of the ID, name, price. Then it's going to have edit URL and destroy URL. So we can pass them back to the JavaScript, and then obviously from JavaScript we can make our Ajax calls and that sort of things. Okay, if we just go back, so request data. Now request data. So that's our product search and a search class. Now request data. Which we are passing to our product search. As you may remember, we have this search only payload, which will get the field that we're passing through. In our case, it's going to be just the search, because this one only takes this argument, and that's all we have for this particular fetch request for the products. Then per page, and order by. So if we look at this request data is what it actually says. It's just the data that's been sent with the request. That's all we have here. And obviously your request order we've already discussed. So that's pretty much everything. And that's what allows us to pass the first test. And obviously that will now return the records when we go into later on implement the view component. We're going to make a call to this endpoint, and that without selecting anything within the form is going to return us the record set with all those records, obviously without any filter. Okay, it's already 8:30. I'm thinking that perhaps we should, because I'm quite hot now here, we should probably stop with this for now, because there's quite a lot. You probably want to go through these files as well and have a look at this. So I think that's going to be it for today. And the next section, we will probably schedule it for next week, Friday. I'm thinking that we will probably continue with this, because we obviously need to write another test to make sure that obviously we can filter the records and then the code can return them back to us, obviously. But we have a bare basis, so now it should be quite easy, because the implementation of the search is already in place. Now we just need to write the test and extract what we've created here in this fetch request, extract some of these methods to a trait so they can later on be used with other modules. But yeah, we're gonna have a look at this during the next session. For today, that's it. I hope you enjoy. I hope I didn't confuse you too much with this. I know it's been quite a lot, but if you have any questions, obviously, feel free to leave the comments under these videos, under this video, and I'm going to get back to you on this. All right. So that's it. Thanks very much. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.